We were all very excited for the Framework 13 Pro. It solves a lot of the issues we had with prior frameworks. It feels more premium, better matching other laptops at this price point. It looks more stylish, meaning I'd feel more comfortable recommending it to an average laptop buyer. It has a haptic trackpad, better speakers, better screen, and more efficient processor options. It ticks a lot of the boxes we were looking for. This is great on top of Framework's extremely unique benefits. It's fully modular and completely upgradable, and it's a consumer-first laptop with both Linux and Windows support. Plus, Framework continues to innovate by having fast LPCAMM2 upgradable memory. This is the first time we've reviewed an Intel Series 3 laptop with that. But the downsides to its upgradability are still there. This is heavier than most 13-inch laptops, and it only has a single-fan cooling solution, so its components do not perform at their best. Also, unfortunately, due to recent price hikes, it's still really expensive. It's still the best Framework laptop by a mile, so it might be worth that extra cost to you. But in this video, I'll make sure to compare it to other alternatives as well. These and the Framework will be linked down below and also on our website, bestlaptop.deals, where we track prices, so you know when it's the best time to buy. Let's start with what makes the Framework 13 Pro better than the Framework 13. The chassis looks and feels so much better than the prior Framework 13. It now comes in a sleek black color, which looks much better than the silver to me. This new one does pick up fingerprints, which the silver didn't, but it's not as bad as most black laptops like the Blade 16. Honestly, I think it still looks better than the older model, even with fingerprints on it. It also feels more premium and a little better built, less flex to the keyboard deck and lid. The new one also has a more full, squared-off look, whereas the old one has a bit of a taper leading up to the front edge. I prefer the thicker look of the new one, especially since the main part of the laptop isn't actually any thicker. The only trade-off appears to be a slight increase in weight, but it's minimal. This is not to say, though, that this is a light or thin laptop. For its screen size, it is still much bulkier than something like the XPS 13, which has a similar screen size and is much more compact. Back on the 13 Pro, the front edge is a bit sharp where you might rest your wrists, but you'd probably only notice this when you don't have support for your arms, like on a plane or train. On the positive, the ports look more cohesive than prior years because their modularity isn't as obvious in the black color. On the other hand, I would love one of the more colorful keyboard combinations than the plain black on ours. I like the one with orange and gray accent keys best. That one feels more dev-coded to me. Other than that, the keyboard is basically the same as prior years. I find Framework's keyboards to be pretty comfortable. I use them a lot, and they are near the top of my list. The 1.5 millimeters of key travel feels ample enough to me. You get a bit more room than lower travel ones like on the XPSs, MacBooks, and the ThinkPad X9s, all of which are competitors. It's not quite as clicky as Lenovo's most satisfying keyboards like they have on the Yogas, but it is quieter. Great for limiting distractions in a meeting. The key presses require a little more force than the Yogas as well, which I prefer, but Josh prefers less resistance to a key press. The keyboard layout is standard on the 13 Pro as well, and I have the option to keep my precious right control key, which has been replaced by the Copilot key on every other laptop. I've sort of gotten into the habit of not using it by now, but that's besides the point. There are dozens of us. The new haptic trackpad is great. Tracking is smooth and accurate, and both Josh and I didn't experience any palm rejection issues, which is very rare on Windows laptops. Part of this is that the trackpad isn't ridiculously large where your palms rest on it. Out of the box, you may want to tune its settings, though. The feedback of the click feels soft and minimal, which you may or may not like. I prefer a little more click than this, so I would change my settings, which you can do. Now, let's talk the new display. It is still a 13.5-inch high-resolution 2880 by 1920 IPS panel with a 3:2 aspect ratio and 120 Hz variable refresh rate. But it now gets brighter and has touchscreen capabilities. Both are great additions to an already nice screen. The one downside of it being a touchscreen is that the coating seems to cause a screen door effect. When looking closely at white-colored content, you can see colored pixels peeping through. We've seen this on other touchscreen laptops as well. And also contributing to this is the fact that this is a matte panel and not reflective, which, other than that, is a good thing. So, besides that one con that we mentioned, it's an excellent display. Josh said it was one of the best displays he's ever seen. As he said many times, both the aspect ratio, high resolution, and high brightness means you can see more lines of code or rows in an Excel sheet than you might expect in such a small form factor. Compared to a low-resolution 16-inch, it's literally not a competition. Even compared to a higher-resolution 16-inch panel, this 13.5-inch screen still does very well. This is one of the things I love about it, because I love the 13-inch form factor as it fits in the smaller bags I use, but I still get a solid amount of visibility on this laptop. When it comes to ports, Framework has the best in the entire industry. You get 4 hot-swappable ports and an insane selection to choose from. There are options for a fast, full-sized, or micro SD card reader, 10 gig Ethernet, DisplayPort, HDMI, whatever you like. The headphone jack is always there, so you don't need to use up a port slot for it, but you can buy one if you need to, for some reason. This new one has changed the mechanism to release the ports from a button to a switch. When it's red, it's unlocked, and when it's black, it's locked, which I think is a nice indicator. The locking doesn't seem to be any better or worse than last year's in terms of sturdiness. Both are good. But if I accidentally leave it unlocked, I'll get the occasional mishap of the port detaching from the laptop because of the charger. The only thing missing regarding ports is Thunderbolt 5 capability, but all 4 ports do support up to Thunderbolt 4 speeds and 140-watt USB-C charging, so you can really do whatever you like other than that. Over other 13-inch laptops, the ports are a major bonus. There really is no comparison. Okay, let's get into configuration options, because if you don't need as much RAM, strong CPU performance, or the special high-end integrated GPU of the Intel X chips, you actually have a couple choices to save some money on this laptop. Firstly, the one I would recommend is the lower-tier Intel Ultra 5 chip with 16 gigs of RAM. That pre-built config is only around $1,600, and you're still getting all the premium features of this laptop I've mentioned. We don't have that specific chip in, but we do have the Ultra 7 in the Slim 7i Ultra on our graphs, which should be a little better. You could also get it with an AMD chip, but it's actually more expensive. The Ryzen 7 for $2,300 will provide more performance than the Intel Ultra 5 will, but its battery life is not going to be nearly as good. We did do a motherboard swap into the new 13 Pro chassis so that we had both the Intel X7 and Ryzen 7 versions to test. The AMD one did much worse on battery than even Intel's more power-hungry chip here. So, the final option to get both good performance and battery life is to splurge and spend $2,900 on the X7 config. You can cut that price down, though, if you only need 16 gigs of RAM, which is what I would do. The X7 chip outperforms the Ryzen 7 chip in last year's Framework by about 16% in Geekbench multicore, but single-core is around the same. Neither frameworks are stellar performers here. When we look at Cinebench, we see a 27% improvement over last year's AMD chip in last year's Framework chassis. This is solid, but the Framework's power limit is holding back this X7 chip. Only 30 watts sustained, which averages around 35 watts when you factor in bursts. Something like the ThinkPad X9 15P feeds the same CPU 15 watts more and performs much better. At the other end of the spectrum, HP isn't feeding their OmniBook Ultra's X9 enough power to even justify it being in that laptop. It doesn't perform much better than the X7 in this framework. Both it and the ThinkPad are worth considering if you're not married to the modularity of the framework, as they cost a lot less. Not only does the modularity have a cost in terms of price, but also in its cooling design. Framework has retained a single-fan cooling solution like prior years. Laptops like the ThinkPad have more robust two-fan cooling solutions and keep their chips running cooler. The core temps of the framework are very high. As with all of the Framework 13s we've tested in a very intensive workload like Cinebench, it gets very warm on the keyboard deck and underside, too hot to have on your lap comfortably. This goes for all the Framework configurations we've recently tested. I do have a positive of the new one, though. The Intel 13 Pro is not running its fans nearly as high as the others. It's actually the quietest of its competitors. This means that with some tuning, you may be able to find a more comfortable fan curve for tasks like these, just like you can with Apple's MacBooks, which also get hot because they prioritize quieter fan speeds. So, we tried the Framework Control app to manually raise the fan speeds earlier than the stock performance mode. The laptop got much louder, but unfortunately it only felt a little cooler to the touch, and it didn't perform any better. This cooling solution is likely a limitation. Even if you try a lesser performance mode, the laptop still feels warm when you're doing something intensive on it. At least you can trade fan noise for performance in some modes, though. When you're not maxing it out, this new Intel framework stays almost dead silent. It also only gets a bit warm, never hot. I used it for about a week for office work and reviewing the occasional video in Premiere Pro, and it never got uncomfortably warm or loud in those tasks. It definitely feels cooler than the AMD chip in the same chassis. We've found the Intel chips to be more efficient than those chips for real-world tasks. Looking at GPU performance, the new framework does well, significantly better than the AMD model, which is not a surprise, as it includes the powerful B390 iGPU. However, it does not perform as well as similar chips that are getting more power. Compared to the Omnibook, they receive about the same amount of power in gaming, 30 watts, but the Omnibook consistently performs better. We feel this might have to do with the distribution of power between the CPU cores and iGPU cores. Gaming laptops you could get in this price point, though, like the Legion 5A, are over twice as good as either of those. And this is only a 5060. We've seen 5080 laptops drop into this price range too, like the Omen Max 16. This trend continues in actual gaming like Cyberpunk, where the new Intel framework delivers barely playable frame rates. The ThinkPad is much smoother here. In more intensive games like Forza, the framework doesn't do great, even at these lower resolutions. Although with the custom fan curve, it did at least stay cooler on the keyboard deck, even if it performed worse. You'd want to stick to lighter titles or lower settings on this laptop. For creator tasks, this is not the laptop to get. It has a smaller screen and it underperforms with its hardware. Even a MacBook Air outperforms it in video editing. Even in Photoshop, the Air does better. This doesn't mean you can't use it for creative work. I used it for reviewing our videos in Premiere Pro, as I said. It worked for simpler projects when I lowered the playback resolution. But it's far from ideal as a video editing laptop at this price point. Battery life is one of the big claims Framework has made on this new 13 Pro. And they get closer to their claims than I expected, which I don't normally get to say about manufacturers. They claim 20 hours in streaming, 17 hours in active web usage, and 11 hours in video conferencing. The test we run is office tasks until the battery dies at 300 nits, which is a bit brighter than they are running it, and ours lasted around 15.5 hours. This is a very strong result. Their battery is around 10 watts bigger than prior years, which is helping, but the efficiency of these Intel Series 3 chips is probably doing most of the work. It also has a variable refresh rate display that goes down to 30 Hz that is likely contributing as well. Funnily enough, I accidentally tested this laptop once on its best performance mode instead of its best power efficiency mode, and it still lasted 13 hours, which is great. As far as how well it performs on battery, it does well. It does not throttle performance much, but it does still underperform laptops like the ThinkPad. The speakers have also been improved this year. The Framework speakers used to be a low point of this laptop. The Framework Pro uses a different design. They are now side-firing, not downward-firing. And the speakers themselves are different. They now sound louder and clearer. But even with these improvements, they still don't sound as good as other premium laptops. They just sound good enough that you aren't going to be mad about it. Take a listen. Here's how the 1080p webcam looks and sounds on the new Framework 13 Pro. It does have a privacy shutter for the camera and the microphone. It does not have IR for Windows Hello, but there is a fingerprint scanner in the power button. Overall, we think it looks okay, but we've definitely seen better webcams at this price point. Here's how the webcam looks and sounds in normal overhead office lighting. For Linux, we did a full install of Ubuntu 26.04 and ran the standard updates, not just a boot off a USB drive. We followed Framework and Ubuntu's instructions, which were really easy. Everything worked: screen brightness, keyboard backlight, haptic trackpad, touchscreen, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and so on. The only issue we ran into seems to be we're recording a video on the webcam crashes the camera app. There were quite a few errors that came up, some of which said that we didn't have the right drivers. If you've seen this issue before, we would love to hear more about it with a comment below. Overall, even on a laptop certified for Ubuntu, it's still not quite plug and play out of the box. Look, previously, frameworks have cost more than comparable laptops with the same specs. Most laptop buyers weren't willing to pay more for a laptop that looks and feels less premium, and most don't upgrade their laptop, so they don't see the value of that. When the pre-orders came out for the Framework 13 Pro, they were at very competitive prices. Given the massive improvements to this laptop, we thought Framework could finally break into the mainstream. But unfortunately, the Rampocalypse came for Framework. Right before we finished this video, they announced significant price hikes, which just brings it back to being more of a luxury device for techies. If you have the money for the Framework 13 Pro, the ThinkPad X9 15P gives you better performance while feeling cooler to the touch during performance tasks and has a larger screen. Then, of course, there is the MacBook Pro 14, which is still a little more premium than the Frameworks and performs a lot better, particularly at this price point where you can get an M5 Pro chip. Josh would buy the MacBook Pro 14, Seth would buy the X9 15P, but I would still buy the Framework. I'd probably just get the DIY version with 16 gigs of RAM before the price goes up again, because the 32 gig version is way too expensive now. It's a fantastic and innovative laptop, but it's clearly not for everyone like we'd hoped. Our full list of laptops we recommend is available on our website, bestlaptop.deals, and we keep that list up to date well after our videos go live. We just launched a student buying section where you can literally select the course you're studying, your hobbies, and your budget, then it makes specific recommendations. That's all we've got for you today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will catch you later.